ミ、いつからそろばん習うようになったんだ?
Hey, don't underplay the importance of the abacus. Have you seen what Mr. Tone can do at one? This week's cold opener featured some queenie-looking lady flying in the sky in a peach carriage. Okay, this is just ridiculous. Those are clearly unicorns, not Pegasi. Are MLP references still kind of relevant? The show proper opened with an obvious nightmare sequence for Doremi over her upcoming level 8 witches exam. Understandably so, considering that these two were going to be the proctors again. Still, I think Doremi should be a little more confident, as she was able to produce a very vivid looking dream. Just ignore the fact that that stamp should be mirrored so that it can come out properly. Doremi's paranoia over failing the exam didn't dissipate, as everyone just so happened to keep saying stuff about dropping out or slipping up. Hell, even homonyms of those terms had her on edge. Oh, don't worry about it so much, Doremi. I'm sure you'll do just fine, and sorry, my eyes feel a little dry. I need to put in some eye drops in. My bad. Though, of course, this wasn't just a Doremi episode, as through a pretty clever little framing device, each of the Ojamajo got back their math tests, which helped to establish each of their general personalities and how they fit into the classic Freudian trio character model. Granted, Doremi still needed to work on her abilities as the Kirk of her team, and oh wow, that's an impressively bad-looking sequence. You know, as opposed to lazy bad animation like from last week, but more on that at the end. Anyway, Doremi was taken to the nurse's office by her friends, who didn't think to take away the source of her trauma. Thankfully, Yuki-sensei was there to provide her with some, mostly good, words of inspiration.
そういう時はドレミちゃんとは反対にラッキーって思うことにしてるの。
Shut up, Lucky! But yeah, basically she told Doremi that if she had a bad dream, she should expect it to be the opposite of reality, which makes sense as by their very nature, dreams tend to be fantastical to the extreme for most people.
Shoot! That was my last quarter.
The exam took place that night because I guess the witch's world works on a very different time zone, and in a nice little bit of attention to detail, Doremi transformed and spoke her usual roll call line softly. Not that it prevented her family from hearing her and waking up. Probably should have turned down the volume on your little toy too. Luckily, Dodo managed to take her place in bed, and her family were too sleepy to notice a very disturbing little detail. With that, the Ojamajo once again made their way into the witch's world, where the Motas were waiting with... Well, may as well use the classic. Man, I'm getting old. Fortunately, the tests weren't for a written exam, but rather just so that supposedly they could take a little questionnaire to help design their future exams around their preferences. With that, they asked what was the one thing they each hated the most, and yeah, a little odd to have a questionnaire about preferences and only ask one question about the opposite of their preferences. Still, all three gave their answers, and thus were given their actual test, which was to plant a flag on a 10-legged thing at a distant lake, and yeah, it's pretty much the first thing you think of, especially after you hear this line. With that, they were off, but of course, testing any anime would be nothing without some kind of over-the-top obstacles, and the proctors already had the blueprints made especially for our heroines. First up was Hazuki's questionnaire. Fellas, sorry to tell you, but the Gege no Gitaro reboot ended a while ago. Thanks to Aiko, they managed to ward off these Yokai Watch rejects with a taste of their own medicine. However, their next obstacle wasn't going to be something they could just scare off, and in many ways was far more terrifying. Pretty sure this is like the kryptonite to magical girls. I say almost all because Hazuki was able to answer all of her problems with no trouble at all, in spite of it being above their actual grade level. Little Miss Overachiever here. Though with that in mind, Doremi and Aiko figured that they could just borrow their friend's intelligence by turning into her, but...
救急の魔女見習いじゃ姿は変わっても頭の中身までは
yeah, I guess magical brain surgery is just a little bit above Zawaldo. Just don't tell Dio I said that. Thankfully, their transformations didn't go to waste, as they managed to use a little twin, or in this case, triplet magic. Of course, the Motes could see what they were doing, but Majorika and Lala managed to convince them to let it pass. And again, if this were the Chunin exams, this would be the whole point of the test. Did Kishimoto steal from this episode? With legitimately their greatest challenge out of the way, the Ojamajo moved on to the final questionnaire obstacle, which, in a low-key moment of awesome, Aiko was able to completely see through the trick and thus wrote takoyaki as the thing she hated the most.
いやー、たこ焼き嫌いやねんけど、しゃあないな。Not chocolate! Anything but that! Please don't make me eat it!
Thus, they were served the horrifying platter of a popular snack food, which, to be fair, is loaded with carbs, so trying to burn all of that off is going to be a punishment in of itself. Though, I am a little more distracted by the fact that this octopus is serving pastry balls filled with the limbs of his brethren.
Squidward! Those calamari rings are squid!
But yeah, this cannibalistic cephalopod named Hachitaro ended up telling the Ojamajo about his very Romeo and Juliet romance with a squid named Surmeko. Because of it, the elder of his village had cast a spell on him that would prevent him from swimming to his beloved. Moved by his tale, the Ojamajo decided to help him with the magical stage, which gave him a pull ring. Well, low-budget solution or not, it did work thanks to the red thread of destiny tied to it that I won't even bother going over since you've probably seen it enough in anime anyway. With that, the lovers were reunited, and this hopefully G-rated tentacle romance, of course, played into the Ojamajo's test, as they had also found their goal of something with 10 legs. However, once they got back to the Motas, they were shocked to find they had actually failed. Well, of course! Squids are considered to have no actual legs. You could say they have 10 appendages, they're 8 arms and 2 tentacles, and okay, I'm just being pedantic at this point. No, they had actually failed due to going over the time limit. Luckily, the lady from the cold opener had seen their good deed and just so happened to be the queen of the witches' world.
Oh, how convenient!
Thus, thanks to the power of royal privilege, the queen, who looks and sounds an awful lot like Princess Ange, let them pass the test. Thus, the episode ended with the Ojamajo celebrating and even Majorika giving her approval. Oh, thank God. After last week's poorly animated and yet really forgettable episode, we got a really good one here. I think one criticism I really should have brought up with episode 12 was how the Ojamajo kind of felt like afterthoughts in their own show, with the Soccer Brothers taking just a little too much focus. This episode thankfully corrected this by giving them all moments to shine. Combine that with some creatively off and distorted imagery, and you make for one of the best episodes of this series so far. As I said, I wouldn't at all be surprised if the whole reason they brought in cheapskate animator Mitsuru Aoyama last week was just to save up their budget and energy for this episode. If that had been the case, then it was a worthy enough sacrifice, because this was visually probably the best episode of the first core of the series. There were just so many unique and varied backgrounds here with just a ton of personality that got across all sorts of different moods. Very clearly hand-drawn stuff like this really has become a lost art in modern anime. Though of course, the most personality had to come from our main characters, with this outing really helping to establish their team dynamic. As I said, it's basically the classic Kirk, Spock, and McCoy model, with each covering for the faults of the other. Hazuki might have the brains, but also plays too much by the rules and thus didn't see an obvious trap. Thus, Aiko had the instincts to see through the Proctor's deception, and while Doremi lacked the skills of the other two, she was basically the heart of her team, whose goodwill ultimately did lead them to their goal in the most efficient way possible, despite what Majorika might say. They don't perfectly fit this model yet, as Aiko is more the leader right now than Doremi, but we can at least see where her arc is going. And this episode's general plot, while definitely not Shakespeare in spite of their efforts, was still overall very solid, with the Motas using much more clever and sensible testing than whatever the level 9s were. Yes, the stuff with the cannibal octopus and his Juliet felt like an awkward side quest in a JRPG, but it was fine and did advance the story at least. And they even managed to include some good and clear seed planning for future events. Yeah, the Queen's voice and a lack of a credit in the ending gives a bit of a strong hint. Overall though, as the final episode of this first core of the series, they managed to essentially give us a strong season finale, even though the show had a new episode the following week that I'm not looking forward to. But at least this one had some really strong and clever character building to it. My Higurashi top 13 characters list should be out sometime next week, so yeah, just in time for Halloween. After that, it'll be November, and yeah, I think a good time is to get back into Sinful Gear with Axis sometime maybe in the middle of that month. Look forward to all of that, and more. And until then though, farewell for now my friends, and if you'll excuse me, after all this, I think I'm in the mood for some calamari.
Krabby Patties are made out of crab!
Or maybe I'll just have some chicken.